Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to this week's podcast. The topic this week is of dogs and cats, and we're going to explore how different people and their personalities experience bliss.
Of dogs and cats. What do you mean by this, and how does it connect with being blissful?
I chose that subject line really because I remembered from my journey and also from experiences I've had where people have explained to me that when you leave a really cozy place that you've been for a long time with other people and you've experienced a heightened sense of awareness and you go home and other people can't understand the experience you've had. Maybe you've been away from home for a week and you come home to your spouse and your children and they're curious about what happened. And so there's two different kinds of people. There's the people who are characterized as dogs who greet you at the door and their tail is wagging and they're hungry for your attention and they want to know everything and they're kissing you and they're jumping on your lap and then there's the cat who walks away from you and lifts its tail and just snubs you how dare you? You were gone. I don't really care what happened to you. I have no interest whatsoever. I hardly even noticed you were gone. So those are, and those personalities translate into the human as well. And so there are people who experience a state of blissfulness in very different kinds of ways, depending upon their personality. And, sometimes that personality is expressed as somebody that we might call an extrovert and somebody else that we might call an introvert. And then there are people who are very emotional and there are people who are more, in the Myers-Briggs language, more sensate, more who are attached to, understanding information and understanding processes than they are in the emotional aspect of things. So I go back to some of what I was talking about last week in last week's podcast, which is about, how we each are called to achieve a state of bliss in a different kind of way. And, for instance, somebody who's an extrovert might feel absolutely blissful beyond compare being in a stadium with 10,000 other people watching and listening to some amazing hard rock band. And the air and the crowd and the yelling and the music and all of that comes together for them in a way in which they are just absolutely in perfect alignment, body, mind, spirit, everything's being fed and they love it. To the introvert, that would be a nightmare. There would be nothing about that would be feeding their bliss. And so I wanted to talk about this week because, again, in helping to coach people to find what are some of the things that could potentially lead you to experience a state of bliss, that it's really important to be mindful of what is your own individual personality. If your spouse or your children or other family or friends become very blissed out by doing something like going to this concert, and you go with them because you observe that they're experiencing bliss, but it really is not a blissful experience for you, then don't expect that you're going to experience bliss there because it does not feed your soul. There are many other ways that you might want to pursue looking for what feeds your bliss. And if you're an introvert, that might be sitting at home reading a fabulous book, listening to classic music on the back porch with the birds singing and a cup of tea beside you. That's your bliss. So don't mimic other people. Do something that fits with your personality.
Staying with the introvert and extrovert, can an extrovert achieve for the moment, can an extrovert achieve a state of bliss while being with lots of people and conversely being alone? And can an introvert achieve a state of bliss while being alone and or conversely with a bunch of people? Is it necessary for your preference? Can your circumstances off type, can you still find bliss?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe that, yes, you can. There is no black and white here, absolutely. I consider myself pretty much an introvert, although people perceive me as an extrovert, but truly I'm very much probably more introverted than I am extroverted at this point in my life. And, I attended a concert the other night that was outdoors, and what made it blissful for me was watching, not so much the music. The music was okay, but for me, watching the guitar players, I happened to be up very close so I could watch the movement of their fingers and the sound that was coming from their instruments, and also seeing friends and, having hugs and joyful reconnection with people I hadn't seen in a long time. So there was a moment of bliss there for me, despite the fact that that would not be my choice ordinarily of a place to go to have an experience of bliss. And I'm sure the same is true for people who are extroverted, that, it doesn't mean that you can't have an amazing blissful experience by sitting on your back porch in your rocking chair with a cup of tea and a good book and listening to the birds. You may very much have an experience of bliss being alone. But what my point that I'm trying to make is that in general, one wants to explore activities and ways of being that are in alignment with the body, mind, emotional self, because the soul is much more likely to be on board with that experience and lead one to that experience of bliss.
What I like about what you're discussing especially is that sometimes we think that the way that we find bliss is the way that everybody finds bliss. Mm-hmm. And Ram Dass has a very famous story about this, where he was talking about enlightenment, and there was an older woman in the back of the room sitting there nodding her head, and he would say something that only someone that had sat at the foot of a guru or dropped acid would know, and she just smiled and said yes. And afterwards he gave her the "come hither, I want to talk to you" look. And when she came forward, she said, "Oh, that was just perfect." And he said, "How do you know?" And she said, leaning over conspiratorially, "I crochet."
Yes, exactly. Exactly. What a perfect story. A perfect story. Yes. She understood all that he was saying because she achieves that. She achieves that state through crocheting.
Yes.
There you go.
And she had the wisdom to recognize, and she taught him. He thought his way was the only way or the best way.
Right.
That you can notice that someone else is getting there a whole different route.
A completely different route.
And it works. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so important, that we recognize our individuality and our own soul's needs, because we are not all from the same cookie cutter.
How do human emotions impact finding that state of bliss? Do you have to be like calm and your whole life managed to find bliss?
I would say absolutely not. Bliss can be found, while working, like some sports activity. Like I remember, I'm not much of a downhill skier, but I did do some downhill skiing in my late 30s, early 40s. I decided I wanted to go try it again. I had skied when I was a kid, but not much. And I remember having a moment of absolute bliss when I skied down my first black diamond slope. And I was doing it. My body was cooperating. The snow was cooperating. The skis were cooperating. Everything was in perfect alignment. And there was this moment where it was like, wow, this is just amazing. And so I assume, I don't know firsthand, but I assume that people who are athletes achieve that state of bliss when they're running, when they're swimming, when they're skiing, or flying through the air in a gymnastics exercise or whatever. And so, no, there is no requirement for stillness or any state of mindfulness other than paying attention to the fact that you are right now doing whatever it is you are doing, or being whoever it is you are being. You are in a state of bliss.
So this completes our series and our prepared questions for this last segment. Is there anything else you'd like to add on this topic at this time?
Not today, thank you. I really welcome any remarks, comments, or questions people might have on this topic. This podcast is on SoundCloud. There is space on SoundCloud for people to send me comments or questions, and I welcome that.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on Shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.